everybody. Good morning. I'm Dr. Steve Stites, Chief Medical Officer at the University of Kansas Health System and Executive Vice Chancellor for the University of Kansas Medical Center. Welcome to Open Mics with Dr. Stites. One of the most dangerous things you can do is fall down, especially if you're an older adult. But if you must fall down, can you fall safely? Just to be clear, we're going to talk about what older adult means as I am hitting that classification. So I was very interested in this particular program. So can you fall safely? Yes, you can, at least according to basketball great Charles Barkley, who demonstrated on an episode of the NBA on TNT. Let's take a look.
When you're falling, right, and you know a lot of guys fall, they try to catch. No, you just you do that.
Yeah, there you go.
You don't do that. You don't try to catch yourself.
Not with your body, Chuck. Not with your hands or your wrists or your elbows.
Do it again, guys. I'm just telling you, guys at home, don't be stupid. Your body is too much. It's got too much force. You're gonna break your finger or your wrist. Get your arms up. Get your arms up.
Your arms and head.
You don't worry about your head. You ain't gonna hurt your head, but you get your arms up.
Okay, I like it. Falls are no laughing matter, though, for older adults, which is why researchers at the Landon Center on Aging, right here at the University of Kansas Medical Center, recruited volunteers to fall on demand. They didn't recruit me. I'm probably too awkward. Today, we're meeting people studying how to take a tumble without seriously injuring yourself. With me here is Dr. Jacob Sosnov, who's an Associate Dean for Research at the KU School of Health Professions. He led a 6-week research program on how to avoid injuries from a fall. 77-year-old Mike Shepard was part of that program and is looking forward to sharing his experience on what he learned. Plus, Dr. Jessica Callender-Rich, a geriatric medicine specialist here at the University of Kansas Health System, she's going to talk with us about why seniors are more at risk of falling than most people and how to find out if you have good balance. We're going to start with Dr. Callender-Rich. All right, Jessica. The CDC says among adults aged 65 and older, I am like 2 months removed from that, in front of that diagnosis still, falls are the leading cause of fatal and non-fatal injuries. And 1 in 4 people in that age group fall every year. What are the most common injuries when older adults or anyone falls down?
So first, we're going to talk about who's an older adult.
Thank God. Because I don't think of hey, I rode 43 miles on a bike on last Saturday.
Right,
I don't
that
think that
doesn't
makes me
count.
old. It makes me young.
Right. Age is just a number. There's chronologic age, and there's functional age.
You know, the CDC says 65 about
well,
everything,
because
though.
you have to, I'll get to that.
Okay.
So there's chronologic age and there's functional age, right? So there's the age that we are based on the day that we were born and how many years we've been alive. And then there is the age that our body is functioning at. And we don't usually assign it a number, but we do think about how people are functioning within themselves. And that's how we decide who is at higher risk and lower risk for things related especially to physical changes as we age. That might be different for the physiologic changes at the organ level, though. So the CDC uses age cutoffs because they're using population data. So for everything, they have to take a step back and look at big picture population data, and then it's our job and your job to think about, but how does that impact you as an individual?
All right.
So what happens when we fall? You know, older adults especially are at higher risk of certainly fractures, which we hear about all the time, right? Hips, wrists, arms, knees, the whole thing. But also they're at risk for muscle strains, they're at risk for certainly head injuries. And frankly, one of the biggest risks is future falls, because we know that once you have fallen, you're at much higher risk of falling again. And when you're afraid of falling, you walk less, which means you get weaker, which means you have more risk of falling, and it becomes a cycle.
So, Dr. Sosnov, what is your research into this problem showing you? And we got to kind of figure out this thing, because falling is such a risk. We see it in our hospital all the time.
Yeah, so we took a slightly different approach than what's been going on a lot. So there's been a tremendous amount of research focusing on how to prevent those falls. So like Dr. Candler-Rich said, trying to look at balance and exercises to improve it. We decided, what are we going to do? People are going to fall no matter what happens. Falls are accidental. We can't prevent them completely.
Yeah, I fall a lot, actually.
So
it's been the story of my life. I'm just not that coordinated.
I'm right there with you. And what we're looking at is, if people fall, can we keep them safe from getting hurt? And it's probably, we're not trying to necessarily avoid muscle strains, but it's really those fractures. What can we do to avoid those fractures? So we teach what we call safe falling patterns, and we teach movement patterns that people can use to reduce the risk of those more serious injuries.
So, is Charles right?
Yes and no, right?
let's
So
talk about
first of
that.
all, I want to make sure that my basketball coaches know that I'm on a segment with Charles Barkley. This is about closest I'll ever get. So is he right? He's right in that rolling. You know, if we were to play the video again, you would see that he rolled, he tucked his chin. Those are two really important components. He also dropped his weight when he was doing his fall. All those are normal and natural things to do that to reduce the risk of injuries, and not falling on your wrists is usually a good idea. The other thing to keep in mind is the direction in which we fall is going to impact how we try to avoid that injury. So if you fall to the forward, you're probably going to put your arms out to brace yourself.
Absolutely.
And that's okay. And I always argue that breaking a wrist is a lot better than hitting your face on the ground.
So, what are we doing? Because he also want to talk about, let's not hit our heads. Why do we have to avoid that so much?
So actually, falls are the leading causes of traumatic brain injury in older adults. And obviously getting a traumatic brain injury as an older adult is really bad. It leads to increased hospitalization, really high death rate. So we try to avoid that, and the best thing to do is to just tuck your head. And if we think about how toddlers go into the other end when toddlers are walking around, they go through the stage when they're learning to walk called guarding. They'll literally walk with their hands here. And I'm not suggesting that we all walk around like this, but there's reasons for it that we want to really try to protect that head.
I probably just need to walk around with a bike helmet. So, all right, well, you have some best practices graphic. Let's take a look at that. So step one, lower your body into a squat. Okay, I like that. I was doing some exercises this morning, got into my squat. Then, numbers two, you push the chin down to the chest, protecting the back of your head, right?
Yep.
All right, and then you protect your head with the arms. We gotta kind of get that picture up there, but I'm supposed to go like this.
Well, you think of
Like
airplanes and the child, or I was going to say the crash. What you do, you're covering your head.
Yeah.
You're trying to protect it. And again, it sort of depends the direction that you're falling, the technique that you're going to use.
So that's that next one, right? Then roll with the fall.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about what that means.
So, again, what we're trying to do is we're trying to make sure that the force of the fall is spread out across the body. So instead of landing on one spot, so again, back to Charles Barkley, instead of landing on the wrist, we're trying to spread it out across the whole body. So that's where the roll comes into effect.
So I was riding my bike one time, and somebody stopped right smack in front of me, and I kind of hit the back of their tire, and I went flying forward. And I'm like, I just got to get into a ball. I kind of rolled as I hit the ground, get my head up there, right? That's the thing.
That's exactly what you're going to do. And the issue is that you don't want to have to think about it. You just want to have to do it.
Yeah.
Right? And that's really where we get lucky. And if we can train people, it becomes a quicker response as they're falling.
And finally, the post-fall recovery plan. You have to know how to stand back up with falling down again. Talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so you want to make sure you're safe after you fall, right? So after you figure out you're not hurt or limited, you're not too hurt, you want to make sure you have a wide base of support to get up, use a chair or a hardy surface like a wall or table, just to be able to get up safely again.
All right, now we have some pictures of Mike in your lab. Tell us a little bit about what we're seeing here and how he's learning to fall safely.
So, first of all, we normally don't train in
He looks
suits.
like Chris Jones, man. He's right there. He's ready to go. He's going into his three-point stance. Watch out, Lamar Jackson.
So what we do is we teach, we practice these. We go through progressive set of exercises. We start on a seating, and then we'll go up to a kneeling height exercises to work on these rolls and body movements. So here, I think we are working on the roll, tucking that shoulder, going into a sideways roll. And then, part of this exercise program, we actually have you fall, which most of us don't fall on a regular basis, and actually practicing it helps you just naturally get better at doing the movement. And we do it really safe. So those are all mats. You can see he's wearing a helmet, some pads. We do it very safely so you can learn how to do it without getting hurt.
Yeah, that's a lot of contraption with the headgear, the harness. So, Mike, do you walk around like that? Do you have headgear and a harness? No?
Well, it was quite an eye-opener when I got in there to see what I'd really gotten involved with.
Yeah.
But no, it worked out well. Still, there's apprehension that first time, and even the practice sessions later. You got to say, I am going to fall. I'm going to be okay.
So it had to be a little daunting at first. You talked about that, falling down on purpose. You kind of sound like you had to fight your own instincts around it.
Definitely, you know. But as we had sessions where we trained for 8 different sessions, and a great instructor there in the staff, and it became a little easier. I won't say totally, but
You bet.
it became easier.
So have you experienced falling problems yourself?
Well, you know, I have an issue like probably a lot of people my age with balance. That seems to be the big thing. And I had one time on Flag Day, I was putting a flag out, and I had 2 hooks. I had one close to me, and one was further out, and I reached too far and fell about 5 feet into some shrubs.
Oh, that had to hurt a little
Well, a couple of ribs fractured, but
bit. Ooh.
but that's the only serious fall I've had.
Yeah. So what techniques did you learn through this class, through this research program?
Well, I think the big one for me, at least, you know, that stuck in my mind, was the protecting of the head. You know, bones can be healed. You know, surgeries can be done to repair, but you know, I prioritized what happens if that head hits.
Yeah, that's a big one, right? Because your noggin's kind of got this skull thing, and man, that brain can reverberate in there a little bit. So, Dr. Callender-Rich, as a physician who treats older adults, you've got to be happy about hearing this kind of research going on. Tell us, why is it so important then to learn to fall the right way?
I mean, I think, you know, as Dr. Sosnoff said, people are going to fall. We can work with people, help them be stronger, do things to strengthen them, work on their balance, do all kinds of things. But falls are going to happen, right? They can happen at any age. We're at higher risk as we age. We are at higher risk of our bones not being as healthy as we age. And really learning how to fall can help prevent the serious injuries that can result from the falls.
So we have some video of Mike and some of his contemporaries working out. Talk to us a little bit about why exercise, team. Tell us a little bit about why exercise is so important as we get older.
So I've said this many times on the show. Movement is medicine. We have to move. Moving around is how we keep our bodies safe, how we keep our brains healthy, and how we prevent you know, the negative effects of aging, at least as best we can. Certainly genetics play a role in some of that. But movement is the thing that maintains our balance and keeps us functionally independent.
Mike, you got the Hyde Park shirt up there. I like that on your video. That looks good. You look good in that. So we talked a little bit about what are some of the things that cause balance problems? What do we see that's causing that?
I mean, there are a lot of things that can cause balance problems. Certainly, muscle weakness is the thing that we really focus on with aging because it's really pervasive, right? It's people moving less, but it's also just the changes in our actual architecture of our muscle that change. And so that's why it's so critically important, even in our 40s and 50s, to really be doing weight-based exercises with progressive and additive weights from that time on.
And our whole proprioception neurologic limbic system doesn't respond quite as rapidly. It gets a little slower as we get older.
Right, so everything slows down a little bit, and the way our reaction times slow down, right? So whether that's within our vasculature and our nervous system and in all the pieces of our body, the ways in which they work together slow down and they don't talk to each other as well as they used to. There are many other reasons, of course.
What are some of the symptoms we see of people with balance problems?
I mean, we might see dizziness. We might see lightheadedness. We might also just see people walking. If you ever see me in the airport, it's a little bit creepy. I sometimes like walk behind people because I'm like, oh my God, they're gonna fall any second.
Yeah,
right?
you're right. Oh,
So just like
I'm gonna make sure.
it's
Yeah.
true. It's a little scary. It's true. Because, right, like there are things that people don't even see in themselves, and if you watch enough people walking, you really notice, gosh, they're gonna trip, right? Or they're not picking their foot up high enough. Even my teenager, after their ACL repair, we went to the surgeon for follow-up, and they were like, he's not picking his foot up. He's got to work on that core and quad,
Yep.
right? Like that's the same thing for older adults. It just gets, has to be a little bit more intentional as we age.
Yeah, you bet. Now, Dr. Sosnoff, how did you decide to fall into this research, so to speak?
Well,
I worked on that all night, people.
Wonderful
How'd you fall
fun.
into that? Yeah.
So, you know, I have a background in martial arts. So in high school, I actually started doing karate because I wanted to get better at football, and I fell in love with martial arts. So I did that for a long time. So I've been exposed to falling and rolling and doing that. And I was giving actually this research project. I was giving a talk on falls prevention to the community back at my former institution. I was in Illinois, and I had this gentleman who told me he falls several times a year but never gets hurt. And I asked him what was his secret. How did he learn this? And he said he had the privilege to jump out of an airplane for the U.S. Army at the Korean conflict.
Okay.
And he was convinced that learning how to do a parachute roll, which is what they taught him, he was able to retain that skill over 50 years and fall safely. So I was all excited to do a 50-year longitudinal study.
Excellent. That's hard
and then,
fund.
yeah, then funding became an issue, and I decided let's do it smaller and let's just teach people. So you know,
did it include parachute jumping? Or did
we
you take
did.
that
We
out?
exclude people who already know how to fall.
Okay,
That's one of our exclusions. So paratroopers, I'm sorry, we're not going to help you right now. So you know, it just became this idea, and we just started working on it. We did some studies, and we found some really wonderful ways to do it. Very few people actually look at fall impact as an outcome in a study. I think we're one of the few in the country, if not in the world. We found that impact forces on the hip were reduced by about 30 to 40% with our technique. And most importantly, the head acceleration, so how fast your head's moving, that is decreased by upwards of 50% after training. And we know that acceleration is, you know, proportional to forces. So if we're reducing that, there's less force acting on the head. And then we actually, it's sort of odd, but we look at people's head bouncing off the ground. They don't do it, but we find that number of head impacts is reduced greatly after training.
Wow, that's really impressive. And do you feel a little more confident about the risk of falling and what you can do in response to that?
I definitely do. I try to walk. Motion is medicine, like you said. But when I walk, I also try to remember and think about what I would do to keep it, you know, at least in my mind. Because if you aren't thinking about it at all, you know, you could forget quite easily. So I try to keep some of the things that we learned in that study to where if I fell, I would be knowing, or at least be thinking that I know what to do.
That's awesome. So, you know, one of the things we talked about was this thing about balance, right? And are there things we can do to help people with their balance?
Yes.
I guess movement is medicine.
There you go. Okay, right? We can help
Vegetable,
people.
someday.
It depends the reason for their balance, right? So if their balance is really a challenge because of some sort of vestibular challenge, right, or something going on neurologically for them, we really need to look at what is the reason that they're having a trouble with their balance so that we can really dig in and try to treat at the level of what's going on with them. And so, as an example, someone who has a problem with their vestibular system causing their imbalance, they would want to go to specific vestibular therapy to focus on how their brain is reacting with the changes in motion. That said, for people that are, which is more commonly people that are having balance problems because of really muscle weakness in the specific muscles that are needed, it's really about reminding ourselves how to walk, right? Strength training, moving, doing things like, you know, some of these simple balance tests actually can turn into exercises. So things like, can I stand with my feet right next to each other? Can I stand on one foot, right? Not everybody can stand on one foot. In fact, many times we'll send people, there's really great data around Tai Chi as a really great way, and yoga also, but Tai Chi specifically, as a really great way to help with people's balance because it really forces people to move slowly while standing on one foot or a narrower base. And that helps kind of reset. We talk about resetting how we fall. We can also talk about resetting how we move and how we stand.
I find that bar class has been like miraculous for me as far as that and my hip mobility, et cetera. So now I understand there's a simple test anybody can do to find out how good their balance is. Tell us how that works.
Yeah, so it really incorporates the things I just mentioned. So there are many tests out there. One example is this 4-stage balance test that you can see on your screen. And so that test really allows you, it's 4 stages, right? So you stand with your feet together. You want to stand for 10 seconds. Can you stand with your feet directly side by side? And then there's a piece called a tandem, which is where you actually take one foot and put it like right next to the other foot, heel to toe though. So they're next to each other. And again, you want to see, can somebody stand for 10 seconds? Then it's full tandem, so you know, heel to toe straight ahead, and then standing on one foot. And somebody who can stand on one foot for 10 seconds without losing their balance and having to put the other foot down is typically at less risk for balance-related falling.
That's awesome. You know, that's how I dance. I'm so good at it.
I have no doubt.
Yeah, no, you should. All right, we're here to answer your questions. Send them in using the links on your screen, YouTube, Facebook, or email the Medical News Network. Let's check in with Doc Hawkeye, who's joining us from Olathe this morning. Flu activity remains low, sir. How about COVID? And how are our inpatient totals looking around COVID? Because you know, it's still, I was looking at the flu map the other day. I was like, oh, that looks pretty good. COVID, though, still a concern.
Yeah, you know, we do know, just like you said, overall influenza activity is very low around the nation and in our community. COVID activity is better than it was. Right now in the health system, we have 11 inpatients who have tested positive, so that is down distinctly from those double digits, certainly the 20s that we've had in the last few weeks. So overall, COVID numbers are good. Circulation is decreasing. That is consistent with the national data for people going to the emergency room for COVID, being hospitalized, and of course the wastewater data as well.
You know, flu and COVID vaccines are available. They're available here now at the health system. We got our COVID vaccines today, but they've been available at the pharmacies for quite a while. So, but you and I are both waiting to get until late October to get our shots. It's either next week or the following week. We're getting our shots right here in the program. So did you see the report, I know you did, on this year's flu vaccine effectiveness? A little lower than usual. Hawkeye, no, I don't like that data.
Yeah, well, let's plug the COVID vaccine. I think it's a great time to go get your updated 2024-2025 COVID vaccine. Now, talking about influenza, again, we never want to miss an opportunity to vaccinate. The influenza vaccines are available. But activity is low, so if you have good access to healthcare, you may be wanting to wait until the later part of the month or early November to really have that immunity through the whole of the influenza season, which lasts through March or April. And yes, the recent data from the Southern Hemisphere, and we do take a lot of information from the Southern Hemisphere because their influenza season basically precedes our influenza season here in the Northern Hemisphere, and there was a vaccine effectiveness against hospitalization for all comers, meaning all age groups, of about 35%. People think that's low. Certainly it is. We would like higher numbers. We should note, though, however, for the United States, for the 2023-24 influenza season, which was last year, for all comers, meaning all ages and all demographic groups, the influenza vaccine effectiveness against hospitalization was about 45%. So what that means, again, is we are now looking at what is the vaccine's ability to induce immunity and reduce your risk of having to go to the hospital. So again, 45% for last year, 35% in the Southern Hemisphere data. We will hope that we can be somewhere obviously up to there, but also more than that, for helping reduce your risk of going to the hospital with illness and, of course, severe illness. Now, another problem to that is that the vaccine uptake tends to be fairly low. So what we need is everybody to be able to get that. Everybody who is eligible, everybody who is 6 months and over is eligible for an influenza vaccine. If we can do that, those large numbers then would help reduce large numbers of people going to the hospital, help reduce their risk of going to the hospital. So that is what we are looking for. We will see how it ultimately turns out, but it does look as if there is a good strain match at this point in time for the influenza vaccine for this year.
All right, so one thing we do know, we just have to remember how brilliant that the COVID vaccinations really are. When you look at the degree of effectiveness and strain matching and how fast they can pivot and how safe they are, it is really a remarkable story. All right, we know many of you have questions. Let's head to Studio B. Alexis, how the heck are you?
Doing great, and we have some really good questions coming in. Jeremy wants to know, when you see injuries from a fall, which cause is most common? Is it from balance issues, from not anticipating medicine side effects like dizziness or vertigo? Which one do you see the most?
Oh, that's a good question. I'm over here like trying to decide.
I think it's hard to separate those out. I'm going to say I
Yeah,
do a
thank
lot
you.
of, you and I both do a lot of
Yeah.
inpatient stuff, and I'll just say years of this, and we will look at every single fall in the clinic and in the hospital, because our goal is zero harm, which means zero falls in our place. And I would say it's rarely one thing. Weakness probably is a part of almost every flaw. A change in cognition, you're just not thinking as clearly, confusion, and often medications. It's just sometimes a little bit harder to pull those apart, especially here in the hospital. And it's clearly, we see a lot more in an elderly population than in a younger population.
Yeah, I do think it's always important to take a multi-pronged approach to really assessing why somebody fell. And there are often multiple things we can do to try to help prevent them in the future.
But you know, a lot of the things that happens is when patients in the hospital, they sometimes get a little confusion, and when that happens, it really leads to, in fact, we do, hospital beds now have alarms on them, because you can set a bed alarm, and that way everybody knows if a patient got out of bed who's not supposed to be getting out of bed, we go running into the room. There's so much work done at trying to prevent falls, because we know falls can be so darn devastating to patients. So.
Yan Liang has another question about rolling when you fall. He writes, in martial arts films, I've often seen skilled fighters roll when they fall. So if we incorporate rolling when we fall, how much does it reduce the chances of injury?
Okay, you're the martial arts guy. Let's go.
Yeah, former martial arts guy. So, you know, it's definitely going to reduce it. You know, I think it's hard to say give you a percentage point, but you're spreading out the impact forces, so the injury is going to be a lot less. And the only caveat to that is, the folks that we see on TV, the stunt people doing it, they're trained professionals. So I don't want anyone to think that they take the class that I offer and they're, able to be in the Bruce Lee movie or anything. Like, you learn to fall, but although Mike probably is able to do it, you learn to fall and you're going to reduce that risk of injury. But there's definite levels of what you can do to reduce that risk.
Mike, did you learn how to do martial arts while you were in his class?
No, I did not.
I'm sorry.
You have to come back.
You got to come back. Yeah, that's the next class. You have to graduate from that. Then you get to go back and do the martial arts part, right? So,
I think it would be so hard to think to add in a roll when you're already going down. Because when I'm falling, I've fallen down, I've tripped on things. Last thing I'm thinking about is rolling when I hit the ground. Is that something
I would argue what you have to do is you have to practice to get used to it.
yeah.
Okay.
Right? It's hard to think, I can't give you a pamphlet and expect you to do it. But what I can
Right.
do is you come in, we practice, you get used to that idea. So as you feel yourself losing your balance, you start to go into that role almost automatically.
It's muscle memory.
It's muscle memory. Just like, when you're walking, you don't think about what your feet are actually doing.
right?
Right.
I think you can learn to do it. Because when
point.
I fall, I tend to roll
Right.
because I think and I repeat it in my head so many times, and plus maybe I've had some practice at it. Mike, do you think about the thing? Okay, I'm going to fall. I'm going to have to roll. Is that?
Well, one of the things too, I don't think I've heard it mentioned yet, was making yourself smaller as you're rolling. I mean, which is part of the roll.
Oh, okay.
And I probably can use more improvement in the roll, but I have got the sequence of trying to get yourself as small as possible when you're falling.
I like it. And
Oh,
just to
that
say-
makes sense.
It does. And can I just say, Charles Barkley has an advantage. We just have to say it out loud, all right? The gentleman has clearly got a very strong, very powerful rectus muscle, and so when he lands on it, it doesn't hurt so much. With me, on the other hand, I just land on bone.
As you reposition.
Yeah, that's as I reposition on the chair. That's exactly right. Thank you for calling me out, doctor.
Joanne
Alexis, back to you.
Joanne McGranahan had a question. She wants to know, what's the correct way to walk? Is there a correct way?
Go ahead.
Correct way to walk. So, very globally, I think what you want to do is you want to make sure that you're keeping your body over your feet as you're moving, right, to stay stable. So what we see sometimes in watching people walk is they're leaning so far forward, they're outside what we call the base of support, so we can think of that as their feet, and that puts them at greater risk for falling. We also see that people, we call it the teeter-totter, they go side to side. That's not a very effective walk. But everyone has their own natural, what we call a gait, their style of walk. So as long as they're able to do that safely, it's probably okay.
Kathy Wooldridge has a question about NFL players, and I'm not sure if our experts on the panel will have this answer, but have a crack at it. Kathy wants to know if NFL players are trained in this type of thing to help prevent head injuries.
Ooh, that's a great question.
You know,
Should they be?
Miami Dolphins quarterback.
Yes, he got trained.
There was a whole piece, and I think it was a Wall Street Journal, one of the major newspapers, that he was trained on how to tuck his head. That said, he then this year got a concussion by leading with his head. So, you know, there's training that you can do, and a lot of these athletes do learn how to move, and they learn it, again, they learn it growing up how to move. And the problem is, as we get older, we tend not to be as physically active, and we stop doing these activities.
Yeah, I think the Tua's story is he did go through a training about how to fall, and it involved protecting his head. Unfortunately, he didn't protect his head when he led with his head, and then he's in trouble, and hopefully he's going to make all the right choices here. Hey, this has been a great discussion. I am really grateful for our guests for being here, because falling is a huge challenge for folks, especially as we, and I say we, get older. I think falling becomes something to be thoughtful about and to prepare for, because it's not so much a question of if, it's a question of when. And when you fall, you want to make sure you do it in a way that tries to minimize injuries. I would love to hear some final thoughts from our panelists before we go. Dr. Sawstop, let's start with you.
I think, like you said, you're going to fall, and then I think it's figuring out how you can minimize that injury risk. I really would focus on tucking that chin and keeping your head safe.
I like it. Mike?
I had one thought that I haven't heard discussed here today. As we age, at least for me, we become less efficient at a lot of things we do, becoming less confident on activities. And that's got to factor into how you fall, or how, you know, if you fall and when you fall.
Absolutely. I think that's a great comment.
Yeah, that
Dr.
fear of
Conrad.
falling, right? That makes you move less, and when you move less, it's worse. So, my big thing, although I normally would say movement is medicine, because it really is, I also want to add that prevention is key. So that means not waiting until we're falling to really start focusing on ways that we can prevent future risk. It really means starting at a very young age, and especially in our middle ages. I got to use hour in that. Did you like that?
I did.
To really make sure that we are moving and grooving and lifting weights and doing all the things to help prevent these problems, right? We want to, in our 80s, be able to reach up and put something in the top cabinet.
I try to tell my patients the older you get, the more important it gets to exercise. Yeah. And it's not like you shouldn't be taking all these days off, because the truth is you got to really get after it. You know, it's all your life. And if you think about our teleological history a little bit, we had to get out and move every day. And now when we sit around and we're doing the couch thing, then you don't get as much exercise that way. So, all right, this has been, as I said, an outstanding program. I'm reminded of the theme I would like to come back to about faith, hope, and science. And I think you heard a lot of science today about falling. So thanks, Dr. Sawstop. Thanks, Dr. Conrad. I think we heard a little bit of faith and hope with you about the things you've done to try and make sure you're a safer faller. Because we're all going to be faller. We just don't want to have an injury when we do it. All right, thanks again to all our guests and to our audience. Remember, faith, hope, and science. Together we can do this. We'll see you next week.
A first of its kind in our region. I'm Alexis Del Cid. On the next All Things Heart, cardiovascular genetic counseling, how you can use it to plan for the future and help manage your heart health right now.
Subscribe to our morning medical update and open mics with Dr. Stites podcasts. Now everywhere podcasts are available.